All right. Hello again, Nerd Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 184. And today, remember how I said yesterday, I don't want this to be about Stop Killing Games because it's just going to involve getting all the Stop Killing Games people here and telling me how wrong I am. I just wanted to talk about how petitions don't work the way people think that they do. It didn't work. I have exactly 2 comment threads on my previous video. Both are about Stop Killing Games. Nobody gave a flying fuck about the idea that petitions are not the things that people think they are. Everything was about, no, Stop Killing Games is amazing and it's wonderful and you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, fine. One of those 2 threads, the poster who shall remain nameless, simply because, again, the purpose of this is not to refute a single person. They gave me a suggestion, though. And whenever I get pushback on a video that I've made like this, and this comes from story time. I'm an abuse survivor. One of the things that kind of happens in your brain when you are abused is you have to kind of come up with a way to kind of justify what's happening, because your brain a lot of times is not just going to accept the idea of, oh yeah, you're just being abused and you haven't done anything. Like, it doesn't make sense that someone would just want to inflict pain on you for no reason. And so an extremely common way for abuse victims to deal with it is they find ways to justify the abuse by finding a reason that they caused it. It's my fault that he hit me because I did this. You know, it's my fault that they made fun of me because I wore this particular thing. And if I just hadn't done that, then they wouldn't have abused me. In actuality, abuse isn't your fault. And I'm going to say this over and over and over again. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. And I know how hard it is to come to terms with that, but it's not your fault. Okay, so because that's already hardwired into my brain, when someone refutes me, like I have been by this one commenter, my brain immediately goes to, you did something wrong. It's your fault. You're stupid. Now, through years of therapy, I have learned to ignore that voice. But it does, like anytime I am challenged on something, my instant reaction is to go back and kind of review what it was that I said and figure out, are they right? And personally, I think that's a very healthy thing to do. You can't get to, the far end of the spectrum where it's like, well, you're wrong and you're stupid and you should never talk again. No, but criticism, even when it's not constructive, is still can still be valuable to you. And this is something that took me a long time to learn, specifically in management, where I would have employees that would just scream at me and say all sorts of horrible things about me, and none of that is useful. But the core kind of inspiration for their little temper tantrum, that might actually be something that I can fix. So in this novel that was left on my page, in the final act, they mentioned specifically, and I'm going to quote this directly, and I have no idea what this person actually feels like or sounds like, but this is one of my favorite voices to use. So if this doesn't sound like you, I'm sorry. If you happen to have some time, 1 hour and 20 minutes, I would highly recommend Louis Rossman's video, Stop Killing Games, Part 2. He had an actual programming technician look into SKG. In the end, their talk was that indeed it would be pretty difficult to simply, well, anyway, he wanted me to watch this video, and so I did. I'm going to preface this right now. Health wise, I'm doing better than I have in a while. I'm still not doing great. And mental health wise, my brain is trying to kill me right now. So having it focus on something so incredibly technical for an hour and a half was one of the more difficult things that I have done in like the past year. My brain doesn't want to focus on that stuff right now, but I did it. I watched the entire thing. And another thing that my brain just vehemently despises is taking notes. I don't understand why, but writing things down causes me panic attacks. For the life of me, I cannot tell you why. I have spoken with it with therapists and things like that. They can't figure it out either. It's just it really, really makes me panic. I have a page and a half of single spaced notes that I jotted down because my brain doesn't work in a way that I can remember things anymore. So I want to talk about Stop Killing Games and my personal problems with it. And the video that I just watched, and I also watched part one. We're going to talk about that too at the beginning here, because I 100% agreed with that aspect. Yeah, and this Stop Killing Games part two, basically, a lot of my notes in here are I agree and stuff like that. And there was only a couple things in there that this developer mentioned that I personally hadn't thought of, but I had kind of assumed something in there would act like that, or something that I didn't understand would cause issues. And then this particular developer kind of explained those things and goes, yeah, actually they would make massive, massive issues. So first things first is talk about Stop Killing Games Part 1. And most of this video is just him critiquing the effectively, I'm going to call it the I give up video. I know that's technically not it was, and it technically not what it was, and it technically is the thing that actually got all the signatures. There was a video that the dude put out today saying that they did cross the 1 million signature threshold. And in the same video, he also mentions that actually doesn't matter because not all those signatures are valid. From a statistical standpoint, it's impossible that all of the signatures could be valid. And there's a number of different reasons why they might not be valid. Things like just accidentally putting the wrong information in there could very easily make signatures invalid. And there's always the possibility that people were spoofing signatures and the things like that. The rule of thumb that he's going with is bare minimum 10% of your signatures are going to be invalid. To be in a place where you are very, very safe from when they check your signatures that it's not going to go under the threshold, you need an extra about 40%. So while they claim they need 1 million signatures, what they actually need is 1,400,000 signatures to totally be safe. And every, 1 million of those signatures has to be real from people in the EU. So yeah. So anyone wondering, they technically have the signatures. I'm still not convinced they're going to have enough actual signatures by the end of the month. I'll be happy to be proven wrong. But this Stop Killing Games Part 1 was basically Louis Rossmann, right? That's his name? Yeah, Louis Rossmann. Basically coming down pretty hard on the founder of Stop Killing Giga Games that I can't remember his name. Again, guys, proper nouns are not a good thing for me. And the only reason I remember Luis's name is it's the name of his channel, and I have the video up on this screen here so I can read Louis Rossmann. Also, I didn't realize that I already knew Louis Rossmann, and I've been watching his video for years because I'm actually a big believer in the right to repair movement, which he effectively started. So, Yeah, but this first video is basically him saying, "Oh, this is hard, tough shit. Welcome to the real world." And I cannot agree with that more. And I've done rants in a similar fashion when I've talked about how a lot of creatives will go, "But running a business is hard." Yeah, it is. Welcome to management. I spent 4.5 or 5 years getting a degree in it and a decade actually working in management, learning how to do it and being told the entire time that I have this easy, cushy job that anybody can do. And they can't. It's a very, very difficult job. And the idea of basically what Luis says is, yeah, you want change? Guess what? You have to do it. And yes, that's hard. You can't just say, well, I want this to change, and then get mad when it doesn't change instantly just because you said it. It requires you to do your research. It requires you to learn about what it is that you want to change. And it requires you to work with other people and accept help and things like that. All of these things that this person seems incapable of doing. Or not incapable, just seems like he refuses to do. You know, he won't run fundraisers for it. He doesn't want to set up a nonprofit or anything because that's really hard and I don't know how to do it. Congratulations. That's how business works. That's how anything works. If I wanted, like, I'm a disabilities rights advocate because I'm disabled and I have to be. In order to continue living, I had to become an activist and I had to educate myself because the doctors that were supposed to keep me alive nearly killed me. Welcome to the real world. It's hard. And understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at is a part of growing up. And understanding, especially when you have a position where you could get the money to be able to hire the people that you need to do this. Like, all the things that he talks about is like, oh, well, this is so hard, and I don't know how, to deal with all the different, laws that I have to deal with. Congratulations, welcome to running a business. That's why most businesses either have a legal department or have some sort of legal team that they have on retainer. Laws are intentionally written in legalese to require the use of a lawyer. It's the same reason why generally accepted accounting practices, or GAAP, the reason that they exist is it requires you to have an accountant. You can run finances without using any GAAP processes, and it works perfectly. But it is literally illegal to do that in some places. And even when it isn't illegal, it will cost you shit tons of money to not use GAAP. And it's just a requirement to force you to use an accountant. It's job security. I have friends that are accountants. I don't think they're bad people. One of them specifically works in the tax world. And we had a little conversation. I said, I hate accounting so much. It's one of, I kid you not, in all the courses that I took in college for my business degree, the vast majority of them were mostly useless because they're written by people that have never run a business before. And have no idea how to interact with actual people. And it's one of the reasons why business degrees are almost worthless nowadays, because again, it's all this theoretical knowledge that has no practical application at all. There were a few courses that were exceptionally useful for me. A lot of my project management, because project management specifically is written by the books are written by project managers, and they are, all the information that they get is from actual projects that have been managed. So those courses are actually very, very useful to me. Quite a few of my marketing courses were very, very useful because marketing is theoretical. It's all about psychology and things like that. And then the last course that was unbelievably useful for me was the accounting course that I was required to take. I hated every single second of it. But by far, of everything that I learned in college, I think the accounting course is the one that I've used the most because it taught me how to read GAAP. So anyway, that first Stop Killing BAMEs part one. And again, it's not intended as, it's not meant to be some sort of rebuke. It's basically meant to be, hey, it's time to put your big boy pants on. You want this to really be a thing? Then you need to step up. Congratulations. And especially coming from someone like Luis Rossmann, he's been fighting for right for repair apparently for something like 15 years. So someone, working for something for 10 months and going, this is so hard. Luis Rossmann is not the person to go, this is really hard. It was 10 months. He's like, sorry, 15 years. And 2 nonprofits later, you go ahead and talk to me once you get there. Talk to me once you hit your first decade. Then we can collab. And apparently right now I saw on YouTube, I think Luis Rossmann is actually currently doing a live stream with the dude that started Stop Killing Games. My brain will not let me watch it right now. I am already fried from what I watched there. So yeah, I 100% agree. Stop Killing Games could be significantly more successful if instead of him just going, well, let's start a petition and that will do everything. Also, I understand that he doesn't speak like that at all. I just like these voices. Instead of him going, well, if we start a petition, then they will have to figure all the problems out. I just have to tell them what they do. Then they will figure out all the problems. He actually could have hired someone to figure out all the legal things. He also could have hired some programmers to actually come up with realistic solutions to these problems instead of the nonsense that they're spouting that is physically impossible. So that being said, that was the first video. And the reason that I watched it was in the second video, Stop Killing Games Part 2, he starts having this conversation with someone that is never introduced, and they never give us their credentials in any way, shape, or form, other than, well, they've been making games longer than Pirate Software has been alive. And that really pisses me off, because as much as Pirate Software is a dick, he does have a history in the game world. Not only him, but his father also used to work for Blizzard. Like, this isn't some random dude who's like, oh, I made an indie game. No, he actually has the credentials to say what he was talking about. He's just an asshole. So everyone trying to discredit him because he's an asshole. Here's another thing about growing up. A lot of really smart people are assholes. And a lot of really successful people are assholes as well. And if you want to exist in a realm where you get to interact with smart people and successful people, you have to deal with assholes. And there's nothing you can do about that. And no amount of, well, I'm not going to talk to him because he said something that made me feel bad. All that means is, congratulations, you get to fail. Because the people that actually succeed learn how to deal with assholes. So all of this stuff, yes, he's an asshole. And I used to be a huge fan of his. I'm not so much anymore. But that doesn't mean that when he says things, I just go, well, he's an asshole, so I'm not going to talk to him. Nope, doesn't work that way. He is very knowledgeable about what he said. And everything I heard in this almost hour and a half video that I watched actually supports a lot of his points. And they keep bringing that up over and over again. Yeah, he's an asshole, but he's right. Congratulations. That's how the real world works. Assholes get a lot of things done. But it's not fair. Tough fucking shit. I would love to live in a world where everyone is all happy and pleasant and only the good people are allowed to succeed. The world doesn't exist. The world will never exist. Bad people can do good things. Good people can do bad things. And assholes succeed on a regular basis. Good people succeed as well. Keanu Reeves is a brilliant example of that. He is probably the nicest person that has ever lived. And he's doing very, very well in Hollywood, which is an entire industry run by assholes. The vast majority of Hollywood is a bunch of assholes. And no one has any problem listening to those assholes because they're assholes that can act and lie to you convincingly. Let's get to this actual thing. So again, I numbered them so I could do that. I think I have 50 different notes here. No, 44. I have 44. 44 different notes. We're just going to go one by one, and I'm going to kind of reference what they were talking about. So at the very beginning of the video, after he introduced them, the first thing that this developer mentions is something that is mentioned a lot in the Stop Killing Games thing, is the idea that, well, EULAs are unfair. And he specifically says something to the effect of, well, EULAs change the rules of purchase after purchase. They basically redefine what purchase means. And if you don't know what a EULA is an acronym that stands for End User License Agreement. They're sometimes also called terms of service, but a little bit more often I tend to see EULA versus terms of service. A lot of times terms of service is going to be literally for services. EULAs are for single player games and things like that. And one of the things he says, well, it's not fair that you could go into a store, buy a game, go home, put it in, and then the first time you run it, they have just redefined what purchasing the games. What you should have is, before you even buy the game, you should be able to look at the end user license agreement. You can. I did it really quickly. I looked up the EULA for Fortnite. Literally, just type in Fortnite EULA into Google, and it'll come right up. You can read the entire EULA without ever downloading. And I've never in my life played a single second of Fortnite. I've never downloaded it. I'm actually not a fan of Fortnite. It's not my kind of game. PvP in general, I suck at. Super, super bad. There's been like one or two games that were kind of PvP focused that I've done pretty well in. Like I used to in, I think it was Dark Souls 3. I actually got pretty decent at invasions and things like that for a while. Which Dark Souls 3 isn't a multiplayer game, but they have a PvP aspect to it. And I used to have a lot of fun with it. And then Transformers War for Cybertron, I was actually pretty decent at the PvP aspect as well. Those are the only two games I've ever been good at that have PvP. Oh, and Power Rangers Legacy Wars. For a while, I would flirt between... I would always be at the second highest tier in there. I was never able to get to the very, very top, because the very, very top, I think, only allowed 200 players in the entire game in that really top tier. And I never quite got there. But I would get to the very, very top of the highest one and get like that close to being in the absolute top. Those are the only PvP games. So I don't like Fortnite. But Fortnite is a free-to-play game. So obviously you can find that. What about like a game that you actually purchase before? Like, how about Cyberpunk 2077? Again, the EULA is available online. So the idea of, well, I should be able to look at it and see exactly what it means before I buy it. You can. You just haven't done the work to do it. Well, that's not fair. I should be able to just walk into a store and it should right be there. No, it doesn't work that way. And this is my biggest issue with this Stop Killing Games thing, is they go, well, I should be able to do this. No, you shouldn't, because the world doesn't work that way. EULAs are legal agreements. They're very, very long. They're very, very detailed. If you were to walk into a store and every single game was required to have their EULA on it, stores wouldn't be able to stock games, because the boxes would have to be so big with this massive EULA printed on it somewhere, and the EULA would get ripped off or all these other things. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And nobody buys games in stores anymore. You buy them on Steam, you buy them on other things, and like I said, online, you can find the EULAs for most games. They exist. A lot of game companies, like I went looking for the EULA for The Witcher 3. There actually isn't a EULA for The Witcher 3. What's it? CD Projekt Red actually has an overall TOS for all of their games, and then Cyberpunk 2077 has its own individual EULA. But The Witcher 3 and there was two other games that I can't remember what they were. I think one of them was Gwent, and I can't remember what the third one was. Those are all covered under a single group TOS that you can still read for free before purchasing any of them. So that is my biggest issue with this Stop Killing Games thing, is they will invent a problem that doesn't exist and then claim that they're going to fix it. Well, yeah, but the EULAs shouldn't be locked behind a paywall. And there is a valid point in the idea of, if you purchase something and the only way to see the EULA is to install it, which invalidates your ability at most stores to return it. Once the box is open, most stores, for software, most stores won't allow you to return it. That in and of itself is a valid point if it wasn't done true. Now, the rest of what this dude says, I actually agree with a lot, but this is just how simple and easy it is for misinformation to be put out there. The person that was being spoken to here, that was doing the interview, again, they never give a name and they never give their qualifications or anything like that, other than they've been designing game architecture for longer than Pirate Software's been alive. I don't know what that means. But sure, whatever. We'll just accept them as an expert, because they did seem very knowledgeable here. They're not an expert on legal documents. They're not an expert on what you have to tell people for purchase it. They're not an expert on consumer laws or anything, because that's not their job. They already have an exceptionally complicated and difficult to understand job. They don't need to also become a lawyer. And that is the biggest problem with this. Stop Killing Games is being run by people that have never worked in game development ever. And they've come up with all these problems that aren't real. And they've come up with these solutions that also aren't real and can't exist. So let's get going. I had a note that I meant to take and the video kept playing. And so note number 1 was EULA's changed the rule of purchase after purchase. And then I talk about Fortnite and Cyberpunk. And then my note number 2 is blank. I have no idea what I thought about the next thing. But the next thing that they talk about is, and I have like little quotes or summarizations of what they were talking about. The one I have here, it's trivial and easy. He's not a software developer, and he's wrong. I agree. So if you go to the Stop Killing Games Initiative FAQ, you will see constantly over and over, they will have these things like, well, isn't this hard to do? And they'll go, no, it's not. It's super easy. Well, doesn't this violate? No, it's super simple. And they keep saying this over and over and over again, and none of that is true. It's written by people that don't understand what the hell they're talking about. And it actually made me think of something that I tried to do when I was in retail and unfortunately was not able to complete it. But effectively, if you want to do something like this, you want to start something like this. Like if we go back to Louis Rossmann, like he started the Right to Repair initiative because he's a computer repair guy. And he started getting really, really annoyed, specifically with Apple products, that he wasn't allowed to work on them. He wasn't allowed to learn the specs on anything. Like he basically had to diagnose and teach himself how these very, very complicated computers work, because Apple refuses to allow anyone other than Apple to work on Apple products. And that's the entire point behind Right to Repair, is this idea of, no, if you buy something, you should be allowed to fix it if it breaks. You shouldn't be required to pay the company that you've already paid in order to use the product that you already own. So he had a significant amount of knowledge when he started it. Stop Killing Games is run by a person that has never built a game in the entirety of his life, and it shows. And in addition to that, he never took the time to actually learn about what was going on. An example from my own life. In retail, I don't know if it's this way now, but a decade ago, something that was becoming really, really big in retail in general was computer-based training. If anyone is unfamiliar with what that is, if you've ever worked in retail in general, there's a very, very good chance that your first day on the job, you didn't go to a register, you didn't go stock shelves or anything like that. What they did is they put you in a room with a really old, shitty computer, and they would have you run these little training programs that were supposed to teach you how to do everything you were supposed to do. Again, I don't know if they are still using them, but when I was in high school and I got my first job, my first day of training, I worked at a grocery store, and my first day of training was going through these computer-based trainings to show me how to scan items at the register. And it had a mock-up of the register on the screen, and it was very, very similar to the register I was going to be using. It wasn't exact because it was written before this particular model of register, or there was enough variation amongst register models that it wasn't exactly the same. But it was close enough that I could kind of figure it out. And depending on the business you're going, I think I had like 6 or 8 hours of computer training I was required to do before I was allowed to run a register at the grocery store. Fast forward to when I was working at OfficeMax, especially once I got into management, we were actually required to have employees within their first, I think it was their first month or 3 months, I can't remember which. They had 40 hours, a full work week of computer-based training that they had to go through. And that would cover everything from register operations, how to read a planogram, how to unload a truck, how to do sales, all these different things. And the reason that computer-based training was so popular is because it's technically faster and cheaper than traditional training methods. And if anyone is unaware, the trainer in the name Trainer Jody has nothing to do with Pokemon. It's because I was a trainer when I could work. That's what I did professionally, and I was exceptionally good at it. I was so good that the store that I worked at hadn't made a profit in a while, was nearly dead last in the district in all measurable sales categories. And I enacted a training program that I think took me about 2 months to implement. Like, it took me, I think, about a week or so to design the training program, and then about 2 months to actually implement it and get everyone through my training process. And in 6 months, I had taken the store from dead last to one of the top 3 stores in the busiest district in the company. And it maintained that until I transferred to another store to fix it, to fix this other store, where I did the same thing, but because it was worse than the store that I was in before, it took me about a year to get it fixed. But I did both, and these were both stores. Like the first store I was in had made a profit before. It had just hit some hard times. The second store had not been profitable in over a decade. It was considered the black hole of the district, and I got it not only profitable, I got it so profitable that the managers were the higher up managers than me were going to be getting bonuses. Like, this is what I do. So the computer-based training was useless. It was actually worse than useless because it taught bad techniques, because the people that helped design these training courses either hadn't worked in a real store in a really, really long time, or had never worked in a real store, and they were going off of, best practices that were designed by some dude in a boardroom with a PhD. They were really, really bad, but I was required to have all of my employees go through this stuff. And then after they went through all that stuff, I would go, hey, you know how you just spent like 2 weeks doing these stupid training courses? Forget all of it. It's mostly useless. I'm going to teach you how to actually do this stuff. And I will guarantee you, if you do the things that I tell you, you will do very, very well, and your job will be very, very easy. If you focus on the nonsense they put in that shit, your job is really not going to be fun. So I did this twice. I had this plan that I was going to present to my district manager and eventually present it to the higher ups at the company that I worked for. To basically say, we need to get rid of the computer training, and I can show you how I can make you all more money if you just allow me to design training plans for you and me to implement them. And all I was going to need is 3 test stores. which in that company, I think they had somewhere at that point, they had somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1,200 or 1,400 stores in the US. So giving me 3 stores was not going to be was not me asking for this huge thing. And they didn't even need to be big stores. So I had started working on an initiative to actually get this thing going. But I had done an insane amount of research, and I had actually implemented these processes in 2 stores already. I had documentation. I knew what was going, and I also had done my research to understand what these people were looking at. I had learned the reports that they look at when they look at stores. I had done all of this research in order to be able to eventually present my findings, and it was going to take me a minimum of 2 to 3 years to get through all of my different training things, to get all the data collected and be able to present it. So the idea of I have this idea and I've been doing it for 11 months and now I feel burnt out, that's not how business works. You want to make change? Congratulations. Expect to spend a minimum of 3 to 5 years working on whatever it is that you want to make the change. And that's for small change. You want to do something like get laws passed? Look at things like the civil rights movement. The first big movements for the civil rights movement, the first big wins for the civil rights movement started in the 60s. You want to know when disabled people started having rights? The 90s, 1990 specifically. In fact, it took 30 years for us to be able to get the government to finally go, oh, wait a minute, disabled people are humans too. Maybe we shouldn't treat them like absolute shit. 30 years and we still don't have the same rights that other people do. We are still fighting every single day for things like the right to marry, which disabled people don't have. That's a whole other story that I can talk about. So this idea of, well, it was 11 months. Nope, it's not how it works. You want to actually change something, especially changing something as large as getting an entire continent to change the way that commerce works. No, 11 months is never enough. And once you get your signatures, let's say this actually gets in front of the EU and they actually do something, which I sincerely doubt they're going to do. But let's pretend that they're going to do that. Congratulations. Your job isn't done. Your job just started. So, no, you need to do your research. You need to actually discover what the real problems are and not just create problems and then come up with magical solutions to problems that you made up. So, moving on. The next thing they talk about is what I have in my notes. Code is licensed. Companies aren't going to be okay with someone giving away their code for free. And I just have, I agree. One of the things that they talk that the developer talks about in this thing is the idea that most game companies don't write their own code. They do for a lot of different aspects, but things like the physics engine, they don't write that code. Something else that I had never even considered is the server architecture. They don't write that code, nor do they own it. They license that from a lot of different things. Amazon is actually one of the bigger ones that you can actually license their server infrastructure. So this idea of, well, all they have to do is give out the source code. It's literally not possible because they don't own all the source code. And the companies that do own it are not going to allow video game companies to give away their proprietary code for free. They make money off of it. That's where they make the majority of their money. And we'll get back to that. They talk about it as later on. They keep bringing it back to that point, so I'll come back to it again. The next note I have, and this is something that annoyed the hell out of me because they keep doing this over and over in the Stop Killing Games thing. Some things could be done that way, but some would be extremely difficult. And my notes are, I agree. And simply because some games could do it doesn't mean you write a law to force all games to do it. This comes up over and over and over again. The idea, like, one of the things that they talk about is Mega Man X Dive. I actually own Mega Man X Dive, and I played it when it was a free-to-play game. My brother actually got it, I think for my birthday or Christmas, something. He got me a copy of it. Now you can play the entirety of Mega Man X Dive for, I think it's $30 is the base game. It used to be a free-to-play game, but it was a gacha game. Now it's completely... I can run it on my computer. The gacha elements are still there, but you can't actually pay for them. You just earn the currency in the Giga game, and then you get to do the gacha stuff. So the $30 is the only thing that you ever pay for it, and it can actually run on a single computer. There's no longer any infrastructure or anything. Like, well, they were able to do that with Mega Man X Dive. That means anyone could do it. No, it doesn't. Just because you found one example where it works does not mean that that is a universal example. And that's a really, really common, what's the legal or not, logical fallacy. It's technically a variation on the anecdotal evidence fallacy. If you're not familiar with this, logical fallacies in general are these breaks in logic that people use to try and prove their point that actually don't work. And the anecdotal fallacy is effectively, well, I say, this isn't, we can't do this. And they go, well, or I say something that's like, well, actually, I know this one person and they actually were able to do it. So that means that it's totally possible and everyone can do it. The example that I've seen most often given for the anecdotal fallacy is cigarettes cause cancer and they shorten lifespans. And someone will go, actually, my grandmother smoked a pack a day every day and she lived to be 93. So obviously that's not true. No, you just have an outlier. And you're using an outlier to try and create data, and that's not how data works. That's effectively what's saying, well, Mega Man X Dive did it. They're an outlier. That's all I can say is that they're an outlier. The vast majority of games don't work that way. And this developer reinforced that over and over and over and over. He specifically talks about the idea for like MMOs. Like for something like a first-person shooter, they talk about this. You can really just have one online server for a first-person shooter or something like that, or maybe like Fortnite, I would assume is very similar, where the entire entity of it can all be hosted because it all just does the same thing. It's just a world that persists that multiple people interact with. You only need one server for that. When you start talking about MMOs, you can have different things like your raid instances need to be treated differently and coded differently than your open world aspects. Your housing system has to be treated differently. And so for a single MMO, you're looking at tons and tons and tons of different servers. And because of that, it's not something that you can just run on your computer at home because it's exceptionally complex. And then Luis brings up this idea that he created his own, I guess, email thing. And he has 17 different email servers that he was able to build on his own that all interact. He's like, well, why can't people do that? Because I was able to do that. And this is another thing that's really, really common with very, very educated people, is they assume their knowledge is universal. And he says this quite a few different times in the videos, like, this is super, super simple. I have guides on how anyone can do it. It's not how it works. This was something I used to have to deal with when I was a private computer tech. Just because I think something is simple does not mean that it's actually simple for everyone. Fun fact, I have perfect pitch. So I can, I have a guitar right over here that I keep trying to learn how to play and my brain won't let me. That I'm probably going to, because I borrowed it from my brother, probably going to give it back to him because I feel bad that I've had it for like a year and I still can't play a note on the damn thing. I can tune that guitar by ear and it's unbelievably simple to me. I just play each note and I'm like, oh, that's flat, that's sharp, that's flat, that's... It's unbelievably simple. If I listen to a song, I can tell you the cadence that they're using, I can figure out the time signature. Like, this is all stuff that is unbelievably simple to me. If you give me if you give me a score, if you're unfamiliar with sheet music in general, when you are dealing with a piece of music that's written for multiple parts, there is this thing called a score that has all of the parts lined up on it, so that when the conductor is conducting it, they can actually see what every single instrument and part is doing at the same time. And they're all lined up vertically, so you can actually see as you go. Whereas, like, each individual instrument will not have the full score; they will just have their individual parts. There are a lot of I don't know about a lot. I knew a decent amount of people that could read an individual part, but if you put a score in front of them, it was just far too complex, and they couldn't figure out what any of it meant, because it's much more complicated than just a single part. If you put a score in front of me, I can do everything with it. It's not difficult for me, because I was a musician for over 20 years. I played I was a multi-instrumentalist. I was a vocalist. I composed music. I arranged music. Like, I have done a little bit of everything, and so all that stuff makes perfect sense to me. But even other instrumentalists can be tripped up by things that seem easy to me. And so my specific note is, Luis has 17 email servers. Why can't MMOs do the same? And my note is because email isn't an MMO. And that's not what the developer said. He tried to be a little bit more, well, it's a little bit. And my response to it has just been, because email isn't an MMO. Like, that's, you're comparing apples and oranges. You're not even comparing apples and oranges. You are comparing apples and nuclear submarines. Like, they're so incredibly different from what an MMO server does compared to what an email server does. Like, it's just not comparable. And it's a bad analogy. It's a straw man at best. So moving on with my notes. Servers have to talk to each other using proprietary software. Amazon example. So again, the thing with, like, an MMO is each one of these servers that they have for all these different aspects of the game, they all have to be able to talk to each other. And most game companies don't actually write the code that makes it possible for those servers to talk to each other. Amazon is one of the companies that creates that proprietary code that doesn't. Another company is called AWS. And this is brought up over and over and over again, is the idea that the video game market, when compared to, because AWS provides their code and licenses their code to a lot of video game developers that want to use online services, but the vast majority, we're talking about 99.9% of their customers, are business customers. And they license these servers to businesses so that they can have offices on opposite sides of the world that are able to communicate perfectly with each other, and to do things like run point of sale systems that one person in Cleveland can hit an enter button and registers around the world are automatically updated to the next bit of software. All that stuff is done through companies like AWS. And if a law was to pass that required online-based games to give away their source code when they stop, when they give up, or when they end the service, what would happen is AWS would simply go, okay, you can't use our software anymore, because it won't hurt them at all. They are a side business to AWS. Their big business is actual business to business services. And so all that law would do would be, it would completely cripple the online video game industry, because they would have to design their own communication code and software that they haven't had to do in a decade, and they don't have the expertise to do it. No one developing for video games is hired to write that kind of code, because the code already exists, and the code that exists is better than anything any game company is going to be able to develop. It's just not feasible. And so a law like that getting passed would not have the effect of, well, we get to keep it. No, it would just end a bunch of it would just end a bunch of giga games. It would make them completely unplayable. And game development in general would probably be set back a decade or two. Because again, the software for this stuff has been around since, technically some of it's been around since the 90s, since the internet first started getting big. Businesses were using the internet a lot more than video games and stuff like that. They have always been secondary adopters after the business world. So yeah, we'd be setting back video games probably at least 10 years, if not 20 or 30 years, because they would now have to develop their own software. And that was something that I hadn't thought about. Again, I understood the idea that games are significantly more complex, and like data center based games are not designed to work on a single computer or allow you to be able to create your own servers. It's just far too complex and strange. And despite the fact like something like City of Heroes was able to do it, that's an exception to the rule. They had some insanely skilled people working on that. And the current City of Heroes that you can play on these servers is not the full version of the game. They have not been able to recreate massive portions of the game because it's just not possible right now. They're working on it. It's possible they may be able to resurrect the entirety of the game, but it's not likely because the game was never designed to work in that particular instance. So my note here is basically using Amazon software would be illegal in the EU. If a law like this passed in the EU, where the game companies were required to give over the source code so that for online-based games, so that the fans could support it afterwards, it would effectively become illegal to use Amazon software because it's proprietary software that, by definition, is not allowed to be given out because they don't own that kind of little license. So it effectively would illegalize the ability to use software like that, or it would force Amazon to change their entire business model for that particular software, which isn't happening. Again, one of the comments on there is like, well, if they just decide to stop, doing things in the EU, then they'll lose 20 to 50% of their revenue. No, they won't. I actually went and looked it up. The largest markets for video games, the top three are China, just barely. The US, again, just barely. We're talking about like, I think $100 million difference between those two. And then in a very, very far away third place is Japan. And it keeps going down. We don't get to the EU, any EU companies. I think Germany is the number one, and they have something like a $6.5 billion video game industry in Germany. Fun fact for anyone that doesn't know, Germany in and of itself has the largest economy in Europe. So the idea that they also have the largest video game economy is not surprising. And then it starts dropping off. I think there's only 3 countries in the European Union that are in that top 10. And they are Germany, France, and Italy. And Italy is barely over, I think, 2 billion. Whereas both the US and China are in the neighborhood of like 48 to 50 billion, somewhere in there. And these are using 2024 numbers. So when you actually look at just the top 10, if we look at just the top 10, you're barely looking at 8% of the market. And again, once you get out of the top 10, you're talking about fractions of a percent once you get out of the really, really big markets. So, even if, let's say, the rest of Europe is really, really big and apparently the rest of the world isn't, let's say 10%. Okay, let's say 10%, maybe. So losing 10% of your markets to something that may cost most video game companies to double or triple the cost of making a game, yeah, that's a really easy sell. It's like, yeah, by excluding this particular part of the world, we're going to save you $100 billion a year. This is the easiest sell in the world for a CEO. Unbelievably simple. Yeah, as they go on, the next point I have is, and I just, this was directly from the developer. I don't know if this is his exact words, but it's pretty close to this. You aren't due the servers. And my post is just, I agree. This idea of by purchasing a game, you're purchasing the game itself. You're not purchasing the servers. And something that comes up, and I think this will come back again later on, and it just kept annoying me that he kept saying this. So I'll probably bring up this point again. But Luis kept saying things like, I paid $100 for this. I deserve to be able to play it as much as I want. Yeah, you paid $100. They paid millions. So once you get to the $1 million mark that you've paid for this game, then you get to lecture me about how much money I spent. Up until that point, you didn't buy the servers. The servers themselves cost a shit ton more than the $100 that you paid, or the 6 years of $15 a month that you paid. Yeah, the servers cost more than that. By purchasing the software, you are not purchasing their servers. That would be like going into a restaurant, buying a steak and going, yeah, well, I want to take the grill home. You didn't buy the grill, you bought the steak. Yeah, but the grill is an integral part of the steak. If the steak didn't have access to the grill, I wouldn't be able to eat it. So, I paid $20 for this steak, so I want your grill. That has to be my grill now because I paid for it. No, you paid for the steak. You got the steak. You enjoyed this steak. The next point the developer brings up is third-party licensed software can't be given away, which is a big problem for indie devs. The reason we have so many indie devs now is because so much of game development doesn't have to be done by developers anymore. You can just license software to be able to get a lot of things. Things like a lot of games do not make their own game engines anymore. A lot of companies don't make their own game engines. How many games are run on Unity now? If every single game company had to design their own proprietary engine, we would not have the indie dev space that we currently have. And it's not just game engines. There are so many different things that you can just license little bits of code instead of having to try and write it yourself. From physics engines to internet integration to DRM, all of those things can simply be licensed now. And especially for indie devs, if you were to require them to require everyone to be able to make games in a state that after they stop supporting the game, they can just give the code away, you would create this massive barrier to entry to indie games that would destroy the market. The reason so many indie games can exist is because they don't have to start from scratch every single time. They can use proprietary game engines, and they can use they can license bits of codes and things like that they simply are not allowed to give away. Now, this is one of the next point is actually one of the points that the developer makes that I kind of disagree with. But effectively what they say is because indie games are smaller, they could make servers without licensed things. And they keep basically saying, like, there are some games that require you to use certain kinds of servers that require licensed software to run. Indie games, because they're smaller, they can just make different types of games. And to me, that is such a bad idea. My note here, yes, but that creates a massive barrier to entry, requiring them to make their own server tech, setting back indie developers massively. And that also creates a situation where indie devs are simply not allowed to make certain kinds of games because they're not able to create that kind of software with only one or two developers. So you're now making kind of two different classes of games. Like we already have, AAA games, then indie games. But now, in addition to them just being like different scopes, you're now going where only AAA studios are allowed to make this kind of game. That's a horrible precedent to set. We do not want something like that. Moving on, they got into a long discussion about the idea of if this thing ever got passed, it would be retroactive, basically forcing all games to, even ones that had already been published, to do this. A lot of people in the comments brought up the idea that it isn't retroactive. Luis specifically said, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's retroactive. And the developer kind of brings up the fact, yes, but even if it's not retroactive, they want it to be. And the person that actually created Stop Killing Games originally wanted it to be retroactive, realized that that wasn't possible, but still wants it to be retroactive. This is just... this is actually something that I understand really, really well from my business law courses. I guess that was another course in college that was actually useful. All my business law stuff is still very, very useful. I think I only took like one or two business law courses, but remarkably useful courses. Laws can't be retroactive. With a few very, very rare exceptions, you cannot retroactive. You cannot punish someone for breaking a law that didn't exist when they quote unquote broke the law. Nor can you punish someone for continuing to exist after a law has changed how something works. Even things like the Americans with Disabilities Act made requirements for how accessible buildings have to be. And one of the reasons I'm so familiar with it was when I was very, very young, I lived in the state of Arizona. And my father worked for the Arizona State Department specifically as someone that helped work with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Like, he literally was the person that would go to businesses and go, hey, this is the Americans with Disabilities Act. These are the things that you need to change in order to be compliant with it. And even with that, buildings could flat out just state, we can't afford to do that. And that was perfectly legal. Fun fact, the college that I went to, the first time I went to college, that was when I first got diagnosed with depression and anxiety. They put me on meds for it that had really bad side effects because we didn't know I was extremely susceptible to serotonin syndrome. And so it really messed me up. And part of the Americans with Disabilities Act is they're required by law to give me accommodations. The building where the disability office for that college was located was not handicap accessible. Every single entrance to that building had stairs. There were no ramps. So anyone in a wheelchair could not actually get into that office. We pointed that out to them. We're like, well, if we ever have someone that can't get into the office, we can use a meeting room in another part of the campus that has handicap accessible places. But both my dad and I just kind of sat there giggling because you're like, you realize this is nonsense, right? That the building, because what they had done is there was a house that was on the property that the college owned, and they just converted the house into offices effectively. But because the building had existed longer than the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was effectively grandfathered. And unless they did major renovations, which they didn't do, they were not required to update it to ADA standards. And so, yeah. So the idea of retroactive laws in the vast majority of the world, they're unenforceable. They're not allowed. They would never get put into law. And if they were, they would immediately be struck down by some court somewhere. Like the first lawsuit would instantly go, yeah, no, you can't do this. You can't retroactively change things. You can change things going forward. You can't retroactively change things. So if anyone brings up that idea of retroactivity, it's not possible. In any civilized country in the world, it's not possible to retroactively force game companies to preserve games. It's just not something. We can move on from that. The next thing that annoyed the hell out of me is the idea of games as a service. Well, if I'm buying this, I should know how long the service is running. And the quote I got, and this, I think this is Luis stating that, but it might have been the developer. They both seem to agree on this idea that this is a good solution for games as a service, so that people know what it is that they're buying. The quote I have here is, "This game is going to run for 5 years." And so they know, if I'm going to be able to play this game for 5 years, is it worth me paying this amount of money to be able to play it for 5 years? That's not how businesses work. It's never been how businesses work. You cannot predict when your business is going to close. You cannot predict any of this stuff. And one of the things that Luis brings up is, how am I going to know when this thing that I use quadruples in price and suddenly takes the game from being profitable to be unprofitable? And then I had a note here. This guy's really focused on indie. Every time they talked about something, it was always, well, the indie market. They completely ignore the vast majority of the video game market, which is not indie games. Don't get me wrong. I love indie games. I think they're amazing. I think they're essential to making the big publishers actually have to improve their product. The Palworld lawsuit is an actual, absolutely beautiful example of an indie studio forcing a major gaming studio to actually have to up their game, because and it was so effective that Nintendo decided to sue them over it. Indie studios are absolutely wonderful, and Baldur's Gate 3 is another one where technically Larian isn't an indie studio where there's only a dozen people. They have over 100 employees, but they're not a big AAA publisher. And Baldur's Gate 3 blew every single RPG on the market out of the water with just how well it was designed and worked. Indie studios are absolutely essential, but they wouldn't exist if big studios didn't do it first. The video game market itself would not exist if it weren't for Nintendo. Again, the big crash in the 80s, that was supposed to be the end of video games. It was going to be done. And then Nintendo came out with with the Famicom, which eventually came over here as the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it restarted the video game industry. It would not exist without Nintendo. And then Sega started fighting with Nintendo and created competition, and that made everything happen. So if you like having your Xbox, thank Nintendo. They're the reason it exists. The idea of this, and they bring it up later on, but I'm going to use the kind of argument I used later now. You cannot anticipate when something is going to become non-profitable. It's just not something that's possible. And so this idea of, if I buy a game as a service, they have to tell me when they're planning to end it. They won't know. Really good example. If you go and buy a gift card from a restaurant, the restaurant is under no obligation to tell you that, well, yeah, the restaurant's probably going to be closed in a year. That's how restaurants work. And despite the fact that you paid money and so you're owed the food, the business closes, and there's nothing you can do about that. And there's no way for them to predict that in a year their business is going to be closed, despite the fact that statistically most restaurants end in less than a year. And if they make it a year, the ones that do make it a year, most of those close within 3 to 5 years. So if somebody buys a gift card from a business that's doing super, super well, that's been open for 6 months, and then gets mad that 7 months later there's no longer a business, tough titty, said the kitty, but the milk's still good. That's not how the world works. That's not how business works. That's not how economy works. This idea of you, because I'm giving you money, you are required to tell me how long my investment is going to last. There is not a single business in the world that operates under those circumstances. It has never worked that way ever in the existence of business. Why in the hell would they do it for the video game industry? And let's say they did do that. What happens to restaurants? What happens to every other industry when they write this law that basically says, yes, if you're selling something that can have value over time, you are required by law to tell them when it is going to no longer be useful, and you are required by law to keep it going for the entire time you claimed it was going to be useful for, Otherwise, they can sue you. Because once you, like, there's a difference between not being able to pay your debts and committing quote unquote fraud because you've actually broken the law. And like fraud can't be eliminated through like bankruptcy or something like that. So these are really really big things that these groups are just saying, oh yeah, it's super easy. It's not, and it will have implications far spread beyond the video game industry. And nobody thinks about this stuff because it's just like, I want to be able to play my games. It's not how it works. Moving on. One of the other things that annoyed the hell out of me, and I said this already, but they go, the developers said, for big companies, let them deal with it. No, it's not how it works. Again, Baldur's Gate 3 would not exist without Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, which were made by some of the biggest companies at the time. A lot like what's it called? Stardew Valley would not exist without Harvest Moon, which was made by one of the biggest video game companies of all time, Nintendo. This idea, well, it's the big companies, they can just deal with the fact that they're all going to go bankrupt. No, the indie market doesn't exist without the AAA market. And the AAA market is learning very, very quickly that the indie game market is actually able to compete with them. For a long time, they thought, well, they're indie games, they don't have to. But now they do, and it's forcing them to get better and create better things. Or actually, right now, it's forcing them to lose shit tons of money. But the hope is that now that they're losing shit tons of money because indies are making better games than AAA developers, either the AAA developers are going to close and start indie studios, or they're going to have to start making better games. And we do see them every so often. I've heard Doom the Dark Ages has been relatively well received. I'm trying to think of other games. Like, big game companies have not been doing super well. The latest expansion of World of Warcraft has been relatively well received. Up until Dawn Trail, I think. Yeah, the most recent Final Fantasy XIV's expansion. Up until that point, Final Fantasy XIV was just hitting nothing but good stuff. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is made by a AAA developer and was lauded for how much people enjoyed it. So AAA video game companies are still making good games, and the trails that they are blazing are leaving space for indie game developers to create even more amazing things. So no, for big companies, let them deal with it, is a stupid thing. Let's write this really, really horrible law that's going to bankrupt an entire industry and only care about the tiny, tiny people that aren't going to be able to exist in it anymore anyways, and let the big people who created the industry, who employ tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, all of those people don't deserve their jobs anymore. All of the tax revenue that they make doesn't deserve to be made anymore. Let's just cripple a bunch of economies. The video game industry, if I remember correctly, just recently passed the entertainment industry as far as how much revenue it generates. So you're talking about one of the largest industries in the world. We're just going to go, well, fuck them. They're all rich people. No, they're not. The vast majority of the people that work in the video game industry are not super, super rich. They're developers and testers and code writers and design artists and all these other things that make kind of average wages or below average wages. And all of them are going to be out of jobs when these big companies can't deal with this really bad law that you got passed. It affects everything. And this idea of, well, the big companies, they're just evil and disgusting. It's not how it works. It's never been how it works. Luis brings up a point, if I remember correctly. The quote I have here specifically: "Why are games such a special snowflake compared to other software?" If you buy, accounting software, you don't expect them to give you access to the servers when they stop supporting your version of the software, do you? You don't expect Adobe to give you access to the online servers that they use for Photoshop, for a bunch of different services on there, do you? Why in the world do video games suddenly become this thing that, well, if I buy a video game, I'm entitled to the servers and everything about the game. Any other software, like your the software for your if you're not familiar with this, registers actually run on. It's aptly named, but not for the reasons I believe it is. It's called POS software, which is point of sale. However, having dealt with many, many different POS softwares, they are, a lot of them, just pieces of shit. No one in their right mind believes that if you pay for the POS software that you have this perpetual license that requires them to, if they stop supporting that particular software, that they have to give you access to all the servers and the data for it. That's not how it works. It's not how it works in literally any market and any business in the world. But for some odd reason, because video games, they're special snowflakes. And the developer starts talking about the idea that designing games for data centers, basically online games, designing them and developing for them is a completely different process. It's not like, I'm just going to use this variable instead of this variable. It's a completely different design process. It uses completely different processes. It uses completely different staff. It's a completely different thing. It's kind of like this is saying building a computer on your own is the exact same as building a car. Remarkably enough, computers and cars use a lot of similar processes, but they're completely different things that require completely different expertise. Your computer at home is never going to have to worry about internal combustion. That's it. There are no computers that run on a internal combustion engine. It's just not how it works. Even electric cars, like, you're never going to have to worry about the torque of your computer. That is something that you have to worry about for cars. So this idea of, well, we can just take, games that are designed online and we can just make it so that they can be played offline. Doesn't work. They're completely different systems. They're designed completely differently. They're not designed to be worked that way. Servers in and of themselves, the developer specifically says that the things like servers have significantly more cores available to them, processing cores, than any home computer that has ever been designed. They have software built into the servers that cannot work on a regular home PC. They're not designed to. They are specifically designed to work with the hardware of a server. So the idea that somehow you are going to be able to reverse engineer something that was designed to be run on a data center and make it so that you can run it on a home server or a homemade web-based server, that's not how they work. And all these people claim, well, yeah, it's super easy. It's not, and you have no idea what you're talking about. The analogy that Luis comes up is basically, he says, yeah, it's basically like telling someone that after they write something down, they now have to rewrite it entirely with their left hand, and their writing has to be perfectly legible. That's not something that people can do. You're asking them to change, an apple into an ostrich, and then getting mad that they can't do that. That's not how it was ever designed to work. One of the other things that I really, really enjoyed is they start talking about there are a lot of things that companies do develop, like internal systems and stuff like that, that they develop at the beginning of the production of something, that they don't know how it works because the person that designed it never made any documentation about what the code is supposed to do. And the line that I have here is internal documentation doesn't exist, nobody does it. And Luis actually brings up the idea, yeah, I can't get my people to document the things that they're doing, and that's part of their job. And because nobody does it, I can't hold them accountable for it. So in order to be able to kind of reverse engineer these things and put them into a place where they could live without all of these systems that exist, you would have to have massive amounts of internal documentation that simply don't exist. No company in the world does enough internal documentation to be able to do the things that they claim are super, super easy. And if they wanted to implement that, because that's what I'm always focusing on, it's like, okay, so this doesn't exist. How do we make it exist? What can we do to do that? Well, it would require you to create a brand new position where the entire purpose of this position is just to go around and document what other people are doing. Because you're never, ever going to be able to find a way to force your employees to do all the documentation that would be necessary to be able to do what Stop Killing Games wants people to do. You want to know how I know this? Because internal documentation has been a problem for almost a century. This is something that affects every single business everywhere. I have seen it over and over. I've seen it in retail. I've seen it in computers. I've seen it in programming. I've seen it absolutely everywhere. Internal documentation doesn't exist. There has never been a solution for it, aside from we are going to hire someone whose entire purpose is to just document everything. And the reason that those positions don't exist is because they're a waste of money. The amount of time they would have to spend and the amount of time they would waste having to go to every single person on your team and figure out exactly what they did and then write it down in a way that anyone can read it, it is such an incredible time waste and money waste that it would double, triple, quadruple the cost of developing literally anything. Because, again, you can't get the people that know what they're doing to be able to document it themselves. Again, they've been trying this for decades. It's never worked. And so what happens is you have to have a third party come in who has to stop them from doing what they're doing so they can figure out exactly what they're doing. And then they have to do this. And then depending on how technical it is, you might have to have a different documentation person or a different team of documentation people for every single different job, because each one is going to be highly technical. And the person writing the documentation is going to have to understand that highly technical position. And who is going to take the time to learn an incredibly technical skill set only to then also learn another technical skill set, which is documentation. For anyone who doesn't know, documenting things in a correct way is actually an entire skill set on its own. And it does require a lot of work to be able to do it well. Why is anyone going to do that twice? Like it's mind-numbingly dumb. And this is where he brings up this. I paid $100 for this. So this idea, I paid $100 for this game. I should be able to play it as much as I want. And this is my literal quote that my literal note that I put in there. And they paid millions. Once you pay millions, you can make demands. There's not a single person on this planet that is paid as much money as it costs to make a game for the game that they're playing, aside from maybe a few whales in the free-to-play market. But even then, a lot of these free-to-play games make cost a decent amount of money to make. And then the developer kind of counters back, because he keeps saying, I paid for this subscription for 6 years. And he says something to the effect of, you paid this money for 6 years. You got no value out of it? There was, you were paying this for 6 years, and you didn't have any fun. You didn't get any enjoyment out of it. You had no good experience for 6 years that you were paying this. And even when you add up all that money together that you paid for 6 years, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what they pay. So this idea of I paid for this game and so I'm entitled, no, you paid for a very, very tiny portion of the game. They paid for the game. And they paid millions of dollars for the game. So no, you don't get to say, well, I spent $100 and so I'm owed. No, they spent $100 million. So we're looking at multiple orders of magnitude more money. You will never spend as much game. Please get this idea out of your head. Well, I gave you money, so I'm entitled. No, you're not, because they paid significantly more money than you will ever pay in the entirety of your life. You will never pay as much money as it costs to make a single AAA game. You will probably never make as much money as it costs to make a single AAA game. So throwing around this idea of, I was a subscriber for 6 years, I spent $1,000 on this game. Congratulations! It annoys me. So another kind of straw man argument that gets brought up often is like, well, older games could do it. Why can't newer games do it? And the developer basically says, the older the game, the simpler the technology. Older games are significantly easier to basically make playable offline effectively because the systems are significantly less complex. Part of the reason, this is my next point, and this is another, not direct quote, but a summary of something that the developer said. Part of the reason companies can make bigger games is by using proprietary services. Games can't be made like they used to. And then the next note that I have in here is software architecture is all about making trade-offs. When people go, well, yeah, but like on the Super Nintendo, like I still have a copy of Mario RPG and I can still play it, as many times as I want. Why can't they make games like that anymore? Because the reason that instead of having a tiny pseudo 3D sprite of Mario jumping around an isometric world that simulates 3D but isn't actually 3D, it's just a 2D picture. The reason that we now can have fully 3D worlds that are procedurally generated sometimes is because companies don't have to start at zero every single time they make a new game. We talk about early games. Things like let's bring up Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. BioWare, is that who made it? Whoever made Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. I thought it was BioWare, but I might be wrong. Whoever made them, they developed an actual engine, I think it was called the Infinity Engine, for both Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and then also for Icewind Dale 1 and 2, and Planescape Torment. All of those use this engine called the Infinity Engine. They actually had to build an engine to be able to create the game that they wanted because the technology didn't exist already to create the game that they wanted. And engines used to be a thing that all game companies made. When they went to Dragon Age, they had another new engine that I can't remember what the engine was called, but they designed a brand new engine for Dragon Age 1, and then they had a different engine for Dragon Age 2. Then Dragon Age 3, I think one of the problems with Dragon Age 3 was they were forced to use a particular engine, or that might have been one of the Dragon Age games. They're actually forced to use a particular engine that they didn't really like, and so they had to kind of backwards design the game to fit in the engine as opposed to designing an engine to do the things that they wanted. And then Dragon Age, the Veilguard was not using a proprietary engine anymore. I can't remember which engine they used, but they actually used one of the big ones. I can't remember which one it is. The reason that games exist the way that they are now is because companies license software. They don't make everything in-house anymore. And because of that, the idea that they can now just give you the source code or make it completely playable on their own, it's not possible for them to do that because some of these things, they don't even actually have the code. They have a proprietary program that just runs, but they don't have access to that actual code. And a lot of other instances where they have access to the code, they're not allowed to share it because that's not part of their licensing agreement. And if anyone brings up, well, then all we have to do is make it so that it's illegal to make licensing agreements where they can't get away. Congratulations, we have the AWS situation where they just go, okay, if you're going to require me that part of my license means that you give away my code, I'm just not going to work with you anymore. I have enough other customers that are not forcing me to do this, that I won't lose any sleep over this, but you guys will be fucked. That's how it works. This idea of, well, we can just force these companies. Nope, that's not how it works. They'll just go, okay, then we're not going to let video games use our code because the code is used literally everywhere. And businesses make them a shit ton more money than video games will ever make them. They're profitable, don't get me wrong, but they can ditch it instantly and just go, yeah, then we're just going to focus on businesses. Because no business is going to try and write a law that forces, the email server to give them access to the source code. It's never going to happen. It's monumentally stupid to even think that. The next thing is just a note I had to myself. Why are we so focused on indie games? Everything always, they keep coming back to indie games. Well, indie games. And this is where they talk about indies could decide to make a different type of game is one of the things that the dev said. And my note here is, so now we're saying indies are only allowed to make certain games. That will go over well. And again, what that will do is that will completely destroy competition in the market. And then we will get things like the Pokemon games, which really haven't innovated in 5 or 10 years at this point? Maybe only 5 years. No, 5 to 7 years easily. The Pokemon games really haven't been innovating aside from Legends Arceus or whatever it was. That was a very innovative game. Other than that, the Pokemon games have been the same games over and over and over again because no one is challenging the Pokemon company until we got Palworld. And I just saw a game being developed, I think by Sony, that looks real close to Palworld. And they have things like throwing objects to make monsters appear on the battlefield, which Nintendo claims that they own that process. And they have you gliding using the animals. And Nintendo claims that they own that process. So obviously, this other company that I think is Sony does not believe that Nintendo's lawsuit is going to go well for them because they're already investing and advertising a game that is doing the exact same thing that Palworld is currently being sued for. That is how we get innovation. Competition, and we want to talk about economics. Competition is always good for the consumer. Because competition either increases quality or it decreases prices. A lot of times it does a little of both. Without competition, we get stagnation and monopolies and things like that, and that's always bad for consumers. It's the reason that antitrust laws exist. That's why we have the nonsense things like the Google App Store and stuff like that recently Alphabet lost a lawsuit about that. And I believe Apple is going through the same thing where I can't remember if they lost it or it's looking like they're going to lose it. We've been seeing this stagnation in mobile technology for a long time now because there's basically two companies that own all of mobile phone architecture and nobody can compete with them. And now we're getting rulings that are going to force people to be able to compete with them. So the next thing, Luis was kind of going through their proponent to, this is how we will treat each different games. And he specifically says there's nothing here about games without an expiration date. And that's because the entire purpose of Stop Killing Games is they want games that don't specifically tell you when it's no longer going to be viable to be illegal. It's the entire point. Either it has to be viable for forever, or they have to have an expiration date on it, which is never going to happen. The next thing I have, the developer keeps talking about the fact that the guy that started Stop Killing Games keeps changing his opinions on what he wants Stop Killing Games to actually do. Because this developer has gone back and gone through quite a few things. And the guy that started Stop Killing Games will contradict himself. He wants the laws to be retroactive. He doesn't want the laws to be retroactive. He wishes they could be retroactive. He does this constantly. And my comment here is, yeah, that's because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Again, we go back to the idea that this is a person that saw a problem. He's like, hey, I don't like it that games end. And he decided that the real problem there was it's greedy companies that are making them end. So he created this problem that doesn't actually exist, and now he's trying to solve that. And unfortunately, when you try to solve a problem that you made up, it starts to become really, really difficult when people start bringing up facts that disprove your made-up problem, and then you have to kind of change how you solve this made-up problem. My next note I have in here is, why are you petting your mic? There was this one part where Luis is just reading some stuff and he starts petting his mic. It just seemed weird to me, and I had to put a note in there. My thought is he had his cat right next to him during this thing, and he kept petting his cat the entire time, who is absolutely adorable. Little void floof, adorable little creature. I adore this little cat. I think I can just assume that he got used to the petting motion and just started doing it to his mic instead of petting his cat. I have no idea why. It was just something that stood out. I was like, that's weird. Next. And this brings up a point I've already brought up, but the developer says, I just want games as a service to require truth in advertising. Again, people that don't understand marketing and advertising have no idea what truth in advertising means or not. I cannot tell you how many times I had customers come in on like Black Friday and they're looking for a doorbuster deal at like 6 o'clock at night on the Saturday after Black Friday. And they go, hey, I want to get this super, super cheap laptop. And I go, I'm really sorry. We sold out of that like the first hour of Black Friday. This is a bait and switch. If you're not familiar with the term, bait and switch actually is a legal term as far as fraud laws go and advertising laws go. There actually are laws that cover what you can and can't do in advertising. And truth in advertising is kind of a blanket term that covers a lot of the different anti-fraud laws and things for advertising. Things like subliminal messaging used to be a thing in advertising. That's illegal now. One of the other things is what's called a bait and switch. And how a bait and switch works legally, in order for you to be charged with a bait and switch, is you advertise a certain product, and then when people get there, they can't get that product, but you offer them a similar product at a higher price point. Going, well, we don't have any more of that left, but we do have this one. It was actually really, really common for car dealers and things like that to this bait and switch to claim that they had this really, really cheap car. And then when you get there, oh, the last one just drove out, but I can give you this other one. And they never had that original car. They were never able to do that. Or a variation on that is where they will have such limited supply, like they'll only have one for a store that's expecting to see 100 customers that day. That is what a bait and switch is you have to be able to prove that you advertise something that you were never going to be able to fulfill. And you were using that to get people in the store only to sell them something different at a higher price point. That's what a bait and switch is. It is not, we had a doorbuster deal that sold out very quickly, which is why we called it a doorbuster deal, and you can't get it the next day. That's not a bait and switch. That's someone that just heard a term that decides that, oh, I'm going to use this because it's a legal term and they're going to think I'm going to sue them. So that's, I just want games as a service to require truth in advertising. That's not what truth in advertising means in any way, shape, or form. Games as a service are required to follow truth in advertising laws because they're laws. That's how they work. This idea that somehow they have this exception where they're allowed to lie to their customers where nobody else in the world isn't real. And this is where I bring up the restaurant thing, my specific notes. Again, that's not how businesses work. Restaurants don't have to tell you when they plan to close the business when selling you a gift card. That's not how it works. I have worked for stores that were closing, and it was 100% legal for us to say, hey, we have no plans of closing, despite the fact that we were closing. Like, that was a 100% legal thing because technically we didn't have any plans for closing. The plans, the decision to close was not made for another few months. But once they made the decision, the store closed very, very quickly. Like, they hadn't decided to close the store yet, but when they did, it took 2 months to close the store. So despite the fact that we weren't planning on closing it here, they finally got to the point where, like, yeah, we're going to close the store. And then closing the store is a remarkably fast process, especially when a store is underperforming. So, yeah, this idea of, I just want games as a service to require truth in advertising. It does. What you consider truth in advertising isn't real. So you need to, again, this is all about the idea you need to do the research. You want to start creating laws about what they can advertise, then you need to learn what advertising laws currently exist. Obviously, you have no idea what they are because you just used truth in advertising wrong. The next thing I have is a quote from the developer. I don't play these games much, and my only response is I would really like to know what this person's actual qualifications are. This is not me saying that this particular dev doesn't know what they're talking about. They seem incredibly knowledgeable about game development. However, they clearly state, I don't play these kinds of games. I'm not familiar with these kinds of games. And it's never actually explained what their expertise is. Again, all we know is that they've been in game development or software development, something like that, longer than Pirate Software has been alive. I really would have liked him to introduce, hey, this is blah, blah. They've worked in this particular field, simply so I would have some context to know where they are coming from. Again, this is not me trying to discredit them. This is me trying to understand their perspective better so I can better understand what they are saying, because understanding the place that they come from is going to help me understand why they're saying certain things the way that they are. It's the reason why I always talk about, I have a degree in marketing management. I have a decade of experience in retail and specifically training. I have 5,000 or 6,000 hours worth of DMing experience. The reason that I do that is I want you all to know where I am coming from, because that changes how you can absorb the information. So again, this is not me discrediting him. Whomever this developer was seems incredibly knowledgeable about what they were talking about, but it would have been nice to know where that knowledge was coming from so I could fill in some of the things where I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Maybe if I knew where you were coming from, I could do my own research to figure out why this doesn't make sense to me. And then Luis comes in and says, I can buy a year's worth of gym membership. Kind of talking about, okay, well, I don't understand why games can't just say, oh, well, they're going to end at this point. If games were to treat buying video games the same way that gym memberships do, like my note here is literally, this would completely destroy one-time purchase games and all games would become subscription. That won't end well. And that's not what Stop Killing Games wants. They don't want to have to pay for every year that the game. They don't want to have to subscribe to every single game. They want to be able to pay once for it and then know exactly when the game is going to end. And that's just not something that can happen. It's not possible. The next thing, and I really started to identify with this developer as he started saying stuff like this. He said, we don't get everything we want. Specifically, he keeps talking about, well, all these people want is to know when the game is going to end so they can kind of figure out if they want to spend the money. Congrats, we don't get what we want. The world's not perfect. The world's not fair. And I believe he specifically says the world's not fair. And my note for that is just, I agree. This idea of, well, this is what I want. Congratulations. If you want it so bad, make it yourself. You want this to be a thing? Make it yourself. That's what all these other game developers have done. They decided that they wanted a game that could do this, and so they made it. You want games that can exist afterwards? Then spend the money and make a system that allows that to happen. Flash died, I don't know how many years ago, and yet I can still go to Flash websites and watch them because somebody said, I don't want Flash to die, and they created a Flash emulator, effectively, to where I can go to homestarrunner.com and watch homestarrunner.com videos in the original Flash format that they were created for. And I love that. Despite the fact that nobody supports Flash anymore, somebody made like a Flash emulator thing, and you can now play Flash games. Despite the fact that Flash doesn't exist. No current internet browser supports Flash. But somebody made it. So you want this to be a thing? Then again, it goes back to that idea of if you want to solve a problem, you actually have to figure out what the real problem is. You have to educate yourself. You have to do some research. And then you have to realize what you can and can't do. And then find people who can do the things that you want to do. I am very familiar with what my limitations are. I have been forced to learn my limitations because when I push past my limitations, really, really bad things happen. Like massively, massively bad things that involve me nearly dying. So yeah, knowing what you can and can't do and being able to find the people that can do the things that you can't do, that's how being a big boy works. That's how running a business works. I know the things that I'm good at and I know the things that I'm not good at. If I was ever to start my own business, I 100% would hire an accountant. I would probably also have a business lawyer on retainer, because neither of those things are things that I am good at. I am exceptionally bad at accounting stuff. It's not that I can't do it. Again, I can look, because I learned GAAP, I can look at a P&L report and I can tell you exactly what's going wrong with your business because it's stuff that I understand. But I can fix your business. I can't fix your accounting problems. It's not my thing. I mean, I probably could if I spent enough time doing it, but I'd hate it. So yeah, I start my own business. The first person I'm hiring is an accountant. The second person I'm hiring is a lawyer. Like, those would be, because those are two things that I just don't like dealing with. I don't like dealing with business law. I am significantly more knowledgeable in business law than I think any of my friends are. And that's not saying much. And if you compare me to an actual lawyer, I know jack shit. But it's something that I had to learn in order to operate in the business world. I had to learn enough to be able to do this. And I also know where my limits are. So, yeah. One of the statements I have down here from the developer, I don't think it's vague. I think it's inconsistent. He keeps talking, Luis brings up the idea that one of the critiques about Stop Killing Games is that most of the things that they are pining for are very vague statements. And the developer keeps coming back to the idea of, no, it's inconsistent. They say one thing and then they say another thing, which is technically true, but I think he's missing what is being stated. I don't think the word they're looking for is vague. I believe the word that they should be using is broad. A lot of the things for the Stop Killing Games initiative are these super, super broad ideas that don't have any specific... in project management, we call them deliverables. They don't have anything specific as far as, well, what do we actually have to do? They're just these broad, generalized ideas of, well, games should be playable after support for them ends. Okay, what specifically do we have to do? You have to make the games playable after. Okay, yeah, we get that. But what specifically does that mean? Do I have to give you the source code? Do I have to... Well, you have to make the game playable. That is a very, very broad definition. And when we're talking about laws in general, that's actually one of the ways that laws can and have been struck down. And I've actually seen quite a few laws just in the past 10 years that have specifically been struck down for what's referred to as vagueness. If a law is too broad, it will be struck down because it allows people to interpret it in a bunch of different ways that can have unintended side effects. Laws by design are supposed to be very, very specific, because broad and vague laws are actually used a lot by dictatorships and fascist governments. And they do that specifically because it allows them to exert any and all control that they want, and to reward and not use these laws against the people that they want to reward. It's a bad way to design laws, and that's one of the reasons our court systems exist in general, is to be able to strike down laws that are written in a way that's broad enough or vague enough that would allow them to be abused. And again, I've seen quite a few laws that have just flat out been struck down for vagueness, just in my lifetime. The next note I have is simplify it into a single player game, and my note is, and the initiative says it has to be the same or similar to what it was when it was purchased. If that's the law, then turning a multiplayer game into a single player game would be illegal. And again, this goes back to the idea of their ideas are so broad and so undefined that if a law was to be written based on what is in the initiative, it can't actually work. Like the idea of you have a multiplayer game, like a good example. Star Wars, what was it called? Star Wars Squadron. One of my most disappointing games. Not because it was a bad game. It was a fine game. But I wanted it to be Rogue Squadron, like the Return of Rogue Squadron, and it wasn't. It's a multiplayer space shooter. It's a purely PvP game, but they do have a single player, a few single player missions that are basically just there to teach you how to play the game. And this is true about a lot of PvP focused games. Like most of them, the single player mode is just a long tutorial to teach you how to play the game. Like that's all it really is. So with how things are worded in the Don't Kill Games or Stop Killing Games initiative, the idea of taking something like Star Wars Squadron and turning it into a single player game would actually, if it was written into law, that would actually violate the law, because the game that they paid for had PvP aspects to it, and now you are giving them a single player only version of that. That would be illegal based on certain aspects of what the initiative is claiming that they want. But in the same thing, they claim that that's a perfectly right thing. And that's where this idea that the developer keeps saying of they contradict themselves. You can't both have, well, all you have to do is make a single player version of it. But then also go, well, if I pay for a game, I should be able to enjoy the game that I paid for as long as I want to enjoy it. And the game that I paid for had multiplayer aspects, and now it doesn't. So they kind of contradict each other. And then towards the end, he tries to kind of, Luis specifically, tries to kind of define, well, what is a service? And he starts bringing up, like, I have all these services on my computer, and I don't have to continue paying for them. They're just there. And he completely misunderstands what a service is. And so the note that I have here, Luis doesn't understand games as a service. You aren't buying the software, you are buying the service. The software doesn't exist without the service. In the same way, again, to go back to the restaurant example, when you are going to a restaurant, you are not buying a steak. That's what you go to a grocery store for. What you are buying is the service of them taking the steak that they own, preparing it for you, and serving it to you, and then cleaning up after you. That is what you're paying for. The experience, the service of them serving you the food. Now, you do get to keep some of the parts of that service, specifically the things that you ate, but you don't get to keep everything. A really good example is an all-you-can-eat buffet. If you pay for an all-you-can-eat buffet, you can't go in, eat your fill, and then fill up a bunch of doggy bags with a bunch of food, because you're like, well, I paid for this food. I came in here. If I was to eat it in here, I could do it, or I'm just going to eat it somewhere else. So I own this food. No, you don't. You paid for the service. A service is not a specific item. It's not a product. That's why, in general, in the legal field, there are two different things. They're called products and service. A product is something that you buy. A service is something that you experience. If I bring my car to have it repaired, I don't get to take their impact drill because, well, I paid for you to change my tires, and that was part of the service. I don't get to just take extra oil filters. Well, you changed my oil filter, so I get to that's not hard. You're not paying for the items yourself. You're paying for the service. And Luis seemed completely incapable of understanding this idea because he's thinking of services as in, well, on Windows, I have this entire tab under Task Manager of services. These are all the different services that are available to me, and I can purchase things that will give me a service. That's not, we're confusing two different, they're the same words, but they're in two very, very different circumstances. In the same way that a cookie on the internet is not the same as a cookie in a bakery. Despite the fact that they're the exact same word, if I tried to eat an internet cookie, it wouldn't go well. So that was my final kind of thing. So, again, I didn't want to get into this topic because it is a very, very complex topic. And I'm actually not against game preservation. I'm against this particular movement that claims it's about game preservation, and it's not. And the reason I say that is because if everything worked the way, like if they were able to get this thing through and they had a law that was passed, it would not preserve games in any way, shape, or form. It would just stop people from making them. This is not a games preservation thing. This is a way to punish game companies for doing things that you don't like. It's not the same thing. If you want to actually preserve games, like I know his name is Toxic now, but the Completionist decided that he wanted to actually preserve games. And so he went and he actually purchased every single game possible that he could on the Nintendo eShop before it shut down for, I think it was Wii U and the 3DS. That is game preservation, because he was actually able to preserve the code. Now, as far as how it's going to be preserved, I have no idea, especially with everything that happened afterwards. There's a good chance that even though he quote-unquote preserved all those things, they're lost to time because other things happened with the Completionist that we're not going to go into here that kind of screwed up everything he touched. But that's game preservation. And if you wanted to find a way to preserve things like City of Heroes, the way that was preserved was not by going to the City of Heroes devs and demanding that they hand over the source code and they change the game so that we can continue. No, the way that they preserved that was a bunch of super fans went and actually created things to allow it to work again. And then they were lucky enough that the developers didn't try to sue them into oblivion. You want to actually preserve games? That's how you go about it. You start creating systems that make it easier for companies to preserve games. You want to preserve games? Find a bunch of really talented developers and start going, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to create a Flash emulator so that despite the fact that Flash doesn't exist anymore, people can still play Flash games. That's game preservation. It's not going to every single company that ever made a Flash game and going, well, you know what? I spent a lot of time on your website and that made you a lot of money. So I made you money. You are required to change this game from a Flash game to something that's going to continue working. That's what Stop Killing Games is it's basically going to these companies and going, hey, you have to do what I tell you to do because this is what I want. And I'm going to tell you, every time in history that has happened, it has ended poorly. 100% of the time. I do not think I know of a single time in history where people have just decided, this is what I want and I'm going to force you to do it, that has ever ended well. Every single time major changes happened, it has been because people have gone, okay, this is what I want. I'm going to find a way that this can happen. And then I'm going to try and start making change. Because up until that point, all you're doing is bossing around people that don't have to listen to you. And that, again, it never goes well. Again, interested to hear from you guys. I have gone on a very, very long rant because, again, it was an hour and a half, a little over an hour and a half worth of videos. I watched both those damn videos. They were very informative. By the way, Luis Rossmann, go subscribe to his channel. He's an incredibly intelligent, wonderful person. And I'm a big believer and supporter in the right to repair movement. Yeah, interested to hear from you guys. Has this helped you understand my viewpoint at all? Do you still think that I'm 100% wrong? And if I am, I need... Again, if you want to change my mind, the way that you do that is not by going, you're wrong! It's by understanding my thought process and then explaining your process in a way that it makes sense to me. And I'm going to tell you this right now. I am one of the most understanding people that I know. I can understand a lot of different people's points of view. So trying to convince me that you're right is probably easier than any other person you're going to deal with on YouTube. I realize it sounds very, very arrogant, but I've been doing this for a while. But again, I watched this entire video and the only thing that it did was reinforce my belief that Stop Killing Games is just a bad idea created and run by a bunch of people that don't know what they're talking about. And as soon as you get someone that actually knows what they're talking about, most of their points fall away really, really quick. And that's really sad because the idea behind Stop Killing Games. The motivation behind it is a good one. I agree with the idea that I want games preserved. I really, really do. However, the way that they're going about it is the wrong way, and the result will not be the preservation of games. It will simply be games will stop being developed. Like, I mean, it's blatantly obvious to me that that will be the result of this, not that, oh, now that we can play anything that we want for as long as we want. No, it's not going to happen. And only someone that doesn't understand how laws work and how the video game industry works thinks that this is going to work. So, like I said, interested to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts? Yeah, and if anybody actually watches that live stream, I'd love to see if after being presented with these ideas, the guy that founded Stop Killing Games is able to come up with a better explanation. Because sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes somebody will have a really, really good idea, but they simply won't understand how to implement it. And so they'll come up with this really, really bad implementation of their good idea. And it isn't until someone actually confronts them with real facts that it forces them to create an actual workable idea. Like that, from a brainstorming process, like that is so incredibly common. So it's theoretically possible if there's enough pushback against these really, really bad ideas, somebody might actually come up with a workable idea. Right now, it's not there. This is not a workable idea. It's going to be harmful to the industry, not helpful. And it's 100% not going to have the effect that these people want. But like I said, if anybody watches the live stream and they do come up with some pretty good points, feel free to put them down there. I'm not sure if I'm going to dedicate an entire another video to this if they do come up with some good points, but I like to be informed. So maybe that'll be enough to at least make me kind of, I guess, non-hostile towards the idea. Because right now, even when I first heard about Stop Killing Games, I thought it was just a stupid idea. So yeah, it's all for me today. See you guys next time. All right. Bye-bye.